Put your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
Bet your mother had a loud bark.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience, the exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives, and moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Inc. graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am not the Chief. Retired Chief Pat Jordan from the LA County Sheriff's Department is off on special assignment. He'll be back probably next week. And so I'm happy to fill in for him and host the show. I'm retired Sergeant from the LA County Sheriff's Department. I host my own podcast, The Cliff Yates Show. And I'm so happy to be joined by two guests this morning. Retired Lieutenant Ron Daly from the LA County Sheriff's Department. Also Chuck, I think I'm saying it correct, Rylant, Chuck Rylant, who's also retired law enforcement from California. Welcome, guys, and thanks for joining me on the show. Today we're going to review the Super Troopers, and we're going to go into our take on that and probably go off on a numerous bunch of tangents, knowing you guys. So I'll introduce first Ron Daly.
Hey, good morning, Cliff. Glad to be here again. And I'm looking forward to a very realistic, fun-filled review.
Chuck, tell us about yourself, and thanks for joining the show today.
I'm looking forward to revisiting, going back down memory lane with Super Troopers. I think it's over 20 years old now. But anyway, I'm a retired cop. I'm a doctor in clinical psychology these days, and most of my time I do expert witness work on use of force cases. And
great.
That's a short version.
Great. That's fantastic. You know, I normally myself, I never have liked movies that have kind of been, I don't know, making, having police officers as the joke of the, kind of, you know, belittling the profession. And but this is, I can now look at this movie, probably the third time I've seen it, from a more open-minded and comedic point of view. How do you guys feel about movies that kind of depict, what do you feel about this movie? Ron, I'll start with you.
Well, I guess you could look at it from the standpoint of, with all the other negative press we get as law enforcement folks, is this was more kind of kind-hearted, wasn't mean-spirited. And I guess as we dive into things, I'm sure we see ourselves or bits of ourselves in each one of these characters. And it was very lighthearted and kind of funny, and wasn't really mean-spirited. So I actually liked it. And when my wife was trying to sleep at times when I was reviewing the movie, she would tell me to be quiet because I was laughing so loud. So it was a total guy flick, but I actually liked it.
Yeah, Chuck.
Yeah, it's funny. I mirror what you say, Cliff. The younger me, a young cop, I like the more serious, like a Heat and so forth. And
Right.
maybe I took myself a little too seriously. But looking back now, especially once I'm removed from the career, I see all these personalities in that movie in other people in the past. Right? It's just an exaggeration. The movie's an exaggeration, but they're all real themes, just hyper exaggerated, which makes it funny.
Yeah, if I looking at it from a stand-up comedy point of view, since I did stand-up for so many years, it does take a little bit of truth, and then it twists it and exaggerates it. And so, we're live, of course. Dragon Roos says good morning and joins the show. And so one thing we could do is, and I like to do, so I like to look at some of the true things that were, because I have a point of view, Chuck and Ron. Ron. I started my police career in upstate New York with a very rural department of 20 deputies on the road patrol. So when I look at the areas they were patrolling, it really resonated because that was the kind of backwoods area that I kind of patrolled. But one thing that rang true that I didn't really realize until I went to California was, so in upstate New York, you could actually have overlapping law enforcement responsibilities. So, for instance, as opposed to California. So in upstate New York, actually, I was with the sheriff's department. The state police could get called to the same call. So, if they call 911, we would come, but they could actually, if their car was stolen or they had a police report, they could actually call the state police number. So sometimes the state police, wanting to boost their numbers, would listen to our calls, and they would show up on calls and then say, "Oh, we got a call on this," so that we would go on our way, and they would take let's say the accident report. So funny, I got called in by the sheriff himself in a tirade, right? And he yelled at me for the day before, the troopers beat me to an accident, right? And he was yelling at me, do you want to lose your job here? And so, of course, I get to California, and there's really, there are specific, areas of responsibility between the CHP, city police, LA, the sheriff. And so speak to that, Ron, if you would, and your experience with that.
Well, let me say this. I have been known to poach in other people's areas and stuff. But I will say it's just because there was like a median in the divider and I didn't want to mess the car up. So I had to go down an intersection or two in order to hang a U-turn, and just happened to see something that would occur that was nefarious. But I would say that I have had my fair share of disputes at borders with folks, and cooler heads have prevailed. But overall, I would say almost without exception, based off of kind of the very urban, violent streets we worked, there was a real healthy respect between the folks that I worked with, and the bordering police, namely like LAPD. I will say there was that bordered to the north of Linwood. I'll leave their name off. We would constantly get in little spats with them. But other than that, I would say that the vast majority of it was when you were and if it was a true crime, not some silly traffic collision or something, that most people were on the border or on borders proactively policing at that time. I don't know how they're doing it nowadays, but we were encouraged to be very proactive and aggressive and ethical with our police work. And you would ultimately either get a call from dispatch and or a shared frequency, and they'd be like, "Hey, can you roll by such and such? LAPD is got flagged down on this," and it just happened to be on our side, and it would just be a real quick transition, and you would take the handle on it. But otherwise, as it relates to, I guess in the spirit of the movie, rolling up and telling them, "Hey, are you lost?" and then conveniently hanging the bird, hand sign out the window or on the side of the door. I, I've never experienced that. I've heard that that's happened sometimes, but never experienced it myself. But for the most part, I enjoy the rivalry depicted in the show, but I did not experience things like that. No.
Chuck, you worked for a couple of municipalities. Did you have anything like that occur?
Yeah, this reminded me. We had a lot of lighthearted banter between agencies. So when I worked in Lompoc, it was a small city, like 40,000 people, but it was a rough, very rough city, a lot of poverty. But we were the city police, and we had the neighboring sheriff. And when we worked graveyard, there'd be 3 or 4 of us cops on, and there'd be one sheriff deputy. And so when things got heated and we really needed help, we were all one department in essence. We all worked together as one.
Right.
But we would tease each other. Definitely when the deputy would come in and poach in our area, we'd give him some trouble. But usually when there was some sort of, I would say, dispute, and I would say that lightly, it would be when, and there's a gray area of where the boundaries were, and you got one of those calls that nobody wanted, some sort of sexual abuse of a minor, and you're like, this is not a fun call. We want to go out and chase drug addicts and stuff. And we're like, this is in the county, and the county would be like, no, this is in the city. And it'd be like we're fighting over who's not going to do the job. It always would work out, but that was the only banter or dispute ever. But it was always generally lighthearted and meant to be fun and playful.
Yeah, I think that's how it was with us. Although it seemed like the difference in California was mostly maybe the dispute over the who's responsible for what it was. Whereas in upstate New York, you could actually the victim could actually had a choice of who they could call. Whereas,
Really?
yeah, so I mean, if they had a burglary, they could actually call the state police instead of calling the sheriff's department. They would take the burglary report, and they had their own BCI. They called the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, but it was rare. It was few and far between that would happen because so in the county on the midnight shift graveyard, Chuck, as you said, when I worked in '78. So we had, if we had a full load, we had 3 to 4 cars on in the whole county. But the state police would only put out 1 car for the whole county. And sometimes they might get called somewhere else. And they had the freedom to do that because they know the local village police departments and the sheriff's department would be covering. So the state police in New York kind of worked at the beck and call of the governor. So they were kind of the governor's personal police force. At any time he could call them in and to just be his cadre of law enforcement, and they could leave everything else behind because local police agencies would handle that. So they had the freedom to do that. However, when they were working the county, there was kind of between the people actually working, there was no dispute really in most cases. But when it came down to the elected sheriff and the higher ups, there could be a real battle going on just because of the elected official of the sheriff and then the state police command staff. So a little bit different. But I liked there was always little banter like in the movie right between the local village cops and then the sheriff's department, and then the state police. So in upstate we had those 3 kind of converging. But in California we never really had that much contact, maybe with the local police and LAPD, right, Ron?
Yeah, there'd be a lot of overlap there. Especially in our North Firestone area, you would run into LAPD like 77th and Southeast, and we would tend to be very mutually supportive and everything else up there. Down south, depending on where you were in the county areas, we butted up against Compton, and then Compton Station as well, and Compton PD prior to that. Yeah, none of the like joint calls generated. There may be because our dispatches run independent of each other at each patrol station. So there may have been like a call for service that was somewhere received at Compton based off of where the person lived when they called 911 for Compton Station, and then some might have gone to Century Station depending on where they live because it's right on the border. So there'd be like multiple calls that are generated there, especially if it's something big like a shooting where you could hear like shots fired like all over the neighborhood. And then obviously everybody would converge and our dispatch would be talking to Compton's dispatch, and probably prior, even unless you were right around the corner to going on scene, you would already have an understanding of what was going on there if they kept the informants on the line and who was ultimately going to have the handle on that. And but no like in the Winnebago scene where they show up and the Spurbury PD or whoever it is already there, and they're like, it's our handle, and they already have like their captains and everybody there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then a full-on brawl. Like that, there was nothing ever like, that's our handle. No, this is our handle. Usually I found it to be the exact opposite. Would be like, hey, here you go, buddy, and then they would like
Yeah.
be in the wind.
Well,
It's
when
funny.
would you ever see a captain on a call ever in your whole career anyway?
Well,
We would actually see that. Yeah.
Did you guys
so
really?
Yeah.
so if you want to have that discussion, I can tell you two
Yeah.
stories
Go for it.
where, okay, I was a training unit. So the trick to, because you would be way too busy to eat, is you would get your trainee into booking. They'd be booking a body, and you would immediately leave the station and either have your partners already roll up and have food for you, and you would roll around the corner and eat, or you would run to one of the local places out and about and turn around and come back, and you would be all fed, and then you get in the car and it'd be time to go work again, right? And then your trainee would be like ready to work, and it was, hey, they'd never say, sir, I'm hungry or anything. Well, needless to say, I'd beeline it out onto one of our main boulevards to go to a food place, and a call comes out that LAPD had a shooting, and the officers had shot at the suspect's car with a shotgun and hit the car. They thought the guy was wounded. A bunch of this stuff was coming out, and I was going northbound on Alameda at the time, which was that major thoroughfare. And lo and behold, here comes the car blacked out. And it's PM's overlap time, so the sun's down. There's not tons of traffic, and I can see the car. Like, granted, I mean, not to get into too much of the vision stuff, but I can see it like miles up there. I can see it like hitting the dips, smoke's coming up, the whole 9 yards. So I black out and pull off to the side, immediately turn around, and don't light it up. I get on the radio and start coordinating units, and then it is going to go right past the sheriff's station that I just came out of on that major thoroughfare. Well, the car stops, and one guy's hanging out. The dude that was shot on the driver's or the passenger side is hanging out of the door through the window. And so I pull up, I'm detaining him at gunpoint and coordinating stuff. And our captain, who will remain unnamed, comes right in front of the car as he pulls out of the sheriff's station, comes rolling up, stops in front of the bad guy's car, like head on, gets out of his car and walks up to me and says, hey, what do you got? And and he's in a suit, no gun, no nothing, and downrange, the whole 9 yards. And that was story one. Story two, not to put it too high, is we had a foot pursuit and a shooting out in Linwood, and we don't even have a containment set up. Nothing. Okay, so the shooting's gone down, suspect's still laying in the street, car doors are still open, we're attempting to account for deputies, the whole 9 yards, and everything else. And I turn around and look, and there is at that time the undersheriff standing in the middle of the street, literally, I'm going to say a minute and a half after the shooting went down and we put the radio traffic out. And he's standing in the middle of the street.
Who's that? Like, you want to say who that was?
It rhymes with Larry Waldy.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah.
And I was like, you have to be kidding me. And he's asking questions and everything. And I'm just like, let us get this thing. It's almost like trying to get water in a headlock at that point. You're trying to get water in a headlock and do your thing. Say that again, Chuck.
I said he's just in the way. He's just in the way.
Give it to him. He didn't try to start telling us what to do, but you know how when you only have so much mental and physical capacity to make decisions and get very critical decisions and things in place at the very beginning of an incident, otherwise it tends to either not look good optically or just kind of start sucking and snowballs, where he was occupying, I'll just say, what little bit of mental capacity and decision making I have. He was occupying it with questions, and I can't remember what was said, but I was still allowed to stay at the station after that, which was kind of surprising. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so we read again in Linwood, South Central LA, Compton adjacent. We had a pursuit that ended with just a stolen car. It was nothing major. And at the time, who ended up becoming Sheriff Baca, he was a chief. He showed up, and a couple of times he showed up just on his own and jumped in a car on the midnight shift and rode with people. So there were times when executives would come out and roll around. I know on hot nights. And Chuckney, you worked up north, right, in a couple agencies, and I imagine I'm thinking from my own experience at a more rural. Not that it would be rural, but that you probably interacted and maybe helped each other out more in those agencies up north where you had more limited resources.
Yeah, I worked in kind of the central coast of California, so kind of between LA and San Francisco, right on the coast.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
The first agency I mentioned, Lompoc,
Yeah.
it's kind of it's on TV sometimes because there's an Air Force base there. So that's
Right.
that was a small city, and so we tend to work more together. When I moved to Santa Maria, which is a little bit larger, but still a small city. In fact, Santa Maria, we're famous for two things. Tri-tip came from Santa Maria, and then the Michael Jackson trial was in Santa Maria. So
I didn't know that. Oh my God,
we're
that is
briefly famous.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a little bit bigger city, and so we had so many resources in the city. They had a little bit more funds, so many cops. So, I mean, the first time I called for a roll by, which in our jurisdiction, that means something doesn't feel right and I'd like somebody else to show up. It's not like an emergency. It's not a crisis. First time I asked for a roll by, I counted there was 24 cops that showed up.
Wow.
All different officers. And coming from Lompoc, the other city where at best I get one other guy to show up, and something that was hot.
Wow.
So we didn't have to work with the sheriff too much at that little larger city. It was kind of much more bifurcated or separate, I guess.
Yeah, and wasn't so Lompoc? There's a prison there, right?
Yeah, there was a federal prison, which was kind of out more in the county jurisdiction.
Oh, okay.
So we sometimes dealt with family members that were there.
I was going to say, yeah, they're up there visiting people, right? And so they would roll through your area.
What was funny about that is a lot of the federal prison guards lived in our jurisdiction, and as time passed, we dealt with them enough that they would badge us, trying to get out of a ticket or whatever. And we'd be like, oh, you work at the prison. Well, come out. Let me search you. Because we started learning that some of those guys were a little bit shady too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I was going to say that, yes, it was weird. Man, do you still work? Even your small cities were probably 10 times larger than where I worked. We didn't even have any cities in my county in upstate New York. We had villages, and sometimes those police departments actually went off duty at midnight on weekdays, and so then we would just pick up their calls if there would be one.
Wow!
But we definitely backed each other up, or needed each other as backup. Where I think, as much as sometimes we helped each other in LA, it was basically, we really don't need you. I have enough of my own team.
Yeah.
Really. Anything to add to that, Ron?
No, I mean, I would say I had the exact opposite. So, being at Century Station, we had one of the larger stations with overlapping shifts on day shift PMs and earlies. And so whenever anything happened, whoever the bad guy was, if it was like some proactive, ongoing, we needed containment set up, literally it was like somebody hit the beehive and all the bees were coming out, especially if it was right at shift change.
Oh, yeah.
We would have like double and triple the amount of cars that probably any other nearby station would have. So I experienced the exact opposite. We were kind of spoiled. And a lot of the not only radio operators, but a lot of the specialized units and resources like Aero Bureau, we'd have because the helicopter wanted to be up over like Linwood, Compton, Firestone, East Rancho Dominguez, because they knew that's where they were going to get all the work unless they were pulled off for, something else in one of the other areas. So we were really spoiled resource wise as it related to being able to, I guess, be self-contained.
Yeah.
At times,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
We would need things, but for the most part, especially if it was at shift change, it was like, we had dozens of cars.
No, that's what I'm saying. We could handle ourselves. Whereas, I'm saying if you really work an outpost or a back area, backwoods, maybe even our remote deputy locations, you had to rely more on other agencies for backup and whatnot.
Correct.
It reminds me of a story. I'm rewriting my memoir. And so speaking of that, Ron and Chucky, maybe this will relate. You can relate to this. So we had one of our main dispatchers, Gerry, was a guy who just passed away, and you probably know him, Ron. But he would ride in all the stations. He would ride in every area. I mean, if something was happening, Greg, who was at the main dispatch center, so when things would happen, and he could actually relate to where the deputies were when they said they were, and maybe they didn't know their exact location. He would actually know. So we used to in Linwood, and you'll probably know the location, Ron. It was at the corner of Century and Bullis, and there was a parking garage. It's kind of across from St. Francis Hospital. And so we used to park up there. It was a 2-story parking garage. And we'd like to go up there at the end of shift, number one, because it was close to the station. Then we could just head over, gas up, finish our reports. Number two, it was up off the street. And, in Linwood, we had to kind of be careful where we parked and had our head into our reports. You might take some shooting. So that was our spot. And so for some reason, I named that the Hilton, So I don't know why. I forgot why I named it that. But so I would tell people, let's meet at the Hilton. So I was up there on one occasion, and I had told my buddy, who was Bill Costley, and I said, hey, let's meet at the Hilton. He said, I'm just finishing up in a ticket. And so I went up on the top part of the garage. No one else was up there. And I was writing, and I looked up to see headlights coming up the one ramp. And I thought that was his police car. So I went back to my report. And when I looked up again, there was a car like door to door next to me. And the guy was panting, and he was just breathing hard. And he says, you better shoot me now, because, and I go, do you have a gun? I got a 45 underneath my arm right here. And I go, oh, that's great. And I threw it in drive and spun around, and I called for assistance. And I remember, I need to request assistance, man with a gun at the Hilton. And so I wasn't thinking that there were detectives working overtime, and people were wondering, where's this Hilton? We don't have a Hilton in Linwood, And so actually Greg Aguirre came on. He's talking about the parking structure. But anyways, Ron, it goes to the point where this dispatcher, he knew exactly what I was talking about. But I got so into using our own jargon that it confused people. When I ended up calling for help, I started using that name. Do you have any stories on that, Ron?
Well, the Hilton's very well known, and you dated yourself. So just to tell you another funny story is you said it was right across from like St. Francis Hospital off of Century Boulevard.
Right.
And by the time I got to patrol, they had already renamed Century Boulevard MLK Boulevard.
Oh,
so
my
it was
God.
King Boulevard.
Jeez.
So, and that was before I even got out in patrol, right about like 2001.
Yeah.
So when you were like, oh yeah, I was right off of Century, it's, right where Imperial and King intersect.
Correct.
They're both east-west streets, and St. Francis Hospital's right there. But one thing that, and you even mentioned this, fond memories, is obviously it was a contract city, so those were only one-man cars. So training units typically, what I would do is if I was going to meet some of the one-man car guys that were in the city of Linwood, I would drive up, we'd meet at the Hilton, and you would just say the Hilton. And we had a variety of places out and about in all of our areas that we could just call out that only we would know, as like a staging area. So you would post up and say you had like a 245 like gunshot victim call, or a 246 call, a shooting call that was in that general area of like Linwood, Southgate, etc. The bad guys and or their friends, if they didn't scoop their partner up and drive them and dump them at one of the fire stations, they would roll straight to the ER entrance at St. Francis. And if you were at the Hilton, like writing paper is typically what I would do, is at the end of the night, we would just back in somewhere. The Hilton was kind of a well-known spot. It would immediately, you would kind of post up and kind of code 5 or go on surveillance on it to where they couldn't see you. The dude would come in and start unloading his guy, and then all of us would like swoop in there, very much like there would be a number of cars, because we were all pretty aggressive and proactive. And then, whether they were the less of the bad guys or the bad guys that got the worst end of the deal or whatever, you have people running all over the place and all kinds of stuff. And it just made for good fun. And that brought back good memories of the Hilton amongst a variety of other places that we had that you would just name a name and they knew exactly where it was. Because we even had a Starbucks that ended up being right up at the north end of Linwood that the Marine Corps guys called Horno, and it was named after the northernmost camp at Camp Pendleton, which was Camp
Wow.
Horno. So they'd be like, "Hey, 911B, or meet the officer at Horno." And
Wow.
we would show up at Horno, which was because it was the northern spot in Linwood. And
Ah,
typically at the end of the night, like when you went to patrol after being off training, is you had to go do your time. You had to go do your time in Linwood as a one-man car to kind of get your teeth cut and show that you can do
correct.
police
Yeah.
work by yourself. So we would meet at like Horno, and everybody knew out there at that time what Horno was. So that's stuff like that, and we got those sprinkled all over the place. I'm sure Chuck probably has something like that as well.
Well, these stories remind me of, if it's January and it's 32 degrees and it's 4 a.m. on a Wednesday, nothing's moving out. And sometimes you're looking for a place to hide. And especially, if you had court all day and then you got to work all night, sometimes it's hard to stay up all night. And so we would find these little cubby holes to park and hide. And we thought they were pretty creative hiding places, but somehow the sergeant would find us every time. Not probably because they did the same thing 10 years earlier, but we finally would start calling out one location by maybe address or landmark, and that
Ah,
actually meant a different location,
yeah, that's good.
right? So he said
Yeah.
meet at place A, but we really meant place B. And I think these little games have gone on for generations and
Oh, yeah.
generations of police work.
So you lied, Chuck.
Okay.
You just fell off the pedestal I had you on. Jeez.
No, that's just using code words.
You touched my heart that they still called that place the Hilton. Thank you. Uh, so it's funny that changed. So you talked about, and maybe people listening. So people, sometimes gang members would, they, instead of calling an ambulance, right, they would just take their people and dump them off at the hospital door. So they never did that when I was there at St. Francis, because at the time St. Francis wasn't a trauma center; it was Martin Luther King. So, but that switched, right? So St. Francis became a trauma center.
Yeah, and also, and again, I don't know when you were out in Linwood, but obviously we had Nelson Yamamoto
Yeah.
shot
Uh-huh.
back in like I believe like '92 or so,
Yeah.
and he was taken to King after his critical care was
Yeah.
alive. They messed up his medication, and that's how they got known as Killer King. And I would just say this: maybe the how shall we say, the customer service wasn't that high, but I can remember going in there on shooting calls and stuff where victims were in there and you were having to handle a report after the fact, that they would have like military medics and
They
stuff in
did.
there. And
That's how
this
they
is
trained in
before,
there. Yeah, they
yeah, this
trained
is
in there.
before 9/11. So these guys
Yeah.
were getting tons of reps as it relates to trauma. And I mean, up into even explosions and all kinds of stuff, they would have these types of catastrophic wounds, and it would give them an opportunity to see trauma medicine and practice trauma medicine as part of their training.
That's correct. Even
And
when I was there, they did that. Yeah.
even on our vests, and I was part of this as well, you would have MLK 902H, which was code for hospital.
Yeah.
You would have MLK 902H on your vest with your blood type and everything, and then you would put a Ghostbuster symbol through it. And that was one of the conversations you actually had because you didn't want to go to Killer King, as it was called. And they actually lost their accreditation later on because their care was like, I guess, not all that
Yeah.
good, and they lost funding. But that would be one of the main conversations you would have with your training officer and or with somebody you were just working with, amongst like, hey, here's where I carry these guns, this is what I do, this is what we'll do if this occurs, this is how we'll handle our traffic stops. And oh, by the way, even if the shooting occurs on the steps of King Hospital, if we're rolling, you're not rolling me to King, you're rolling me to Francis.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was just the thing at that time. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but I could tell you there was some strong opinions about that being a level 1 trauma center. And then obviously I believe they lost that and they were closed for a while. They may have reopened,
Yeah. They
and
were
then they would
closed.
just had
Yeah.
Augusta Hawkins, and so you could drop off your 5150s there. But
Yep.
after
Across the
that they
street.
didn't,
Yeah.
yeah, they didn't do any of that, and almost everything went to Francis.
Yeah. So prior to the Yamamoto shooting, they were still, and to let people know, that's why I look at this movie and I can say, I can look at any movie now, even as ridiculous as it might be, that people might think, well, that can never happen. It's just like, I almost never say that just because of the things that I remember. Now you spark these memories of Martin Luther King. So the thing about MLK, like you said, they actually used that, like you said, a training ground for the military surgeons, because they dealt with so many gunshot victims that they became so expert at it. But what my training officer would tell me is that they were so expert at cracking chest and dealing with gunshot wounds. It was actually, and to your point again, it was the aftercare that would kill you, right? I mean, they will save your life, but as soon as you were done with the ER, then who knows what might happen to you. And,
Yeah, transport out immediately.
Yeah. And I thought you were going to this, and it seems unbelievable. I mean, I was called on a Saturday night, gunshot victim, MLK, and I just remember walking through the myriad of bodies that were adjacent to the ER there. And after like 25 minutes, I gave up. I couldn't find my gunshot. That's how many gunshot victims were there. That anybody got shot in Carson? Is there anybody here that was, And so, I mean, that's how crazy it was there. And to go on to the movie is how crazy you might think it couldn't happen. So, you know how we're trained, right? We have a gunshot victim. They go to MLK. And so then sometime we had a guy die on the table there, right? And so I remember Deputy Goodhart was the deputy. And so, he's trained to protect that crime scene right now. That's a homicide. This guy. So, because they had so many people coming in, the MLK security people, their job was now to take that body down to the morgue down below in the basement. And so they would start wheeling that guy. Well, Goodhart says, hey, no way, man. This is homicides. And so you're not taking that body anywhere. And I was there watching a dog bite guy. Next thing I know, I mean, there is 5-6 security guards. There's 6 deputies. The gurney is smashing into glass. Things are breaking. These guys are fighting over this body. We had to call for assistance. Police cars are coming into the ER. Can you picture that scene, Ron?
Well, I will tell you, the security guards, how shall we say, at Francis and King, for that matter. So in some of the areas, they actually had county police before we absorbed county police. Right,
that's correct. Yeah.
But the security guards that maintain the gate arm at the entrance there to monitor traffic and stuff, I will just say they were quite hood and quite street, and
yeah.
It would get kind of colorful, for lack of a better word, and it was just good street ghetto drama, and they were very zealous about how they went about their business. Those security guards that were out front there.
Yeah.
You guys mentioned, I bet a lot of people watching this aren't aware of this, but body drops in front of the ER.
Yeah.
The first time I saw that, I was like, why would somebody drop a body off here? And then you realize maybe half alive or half dead, just how frequent of an occurrence that is. Because for those that aren't in law enforcement, some of these people are doing something that's illegal and someone dies or is dying, and they don't want to call the emergency like us normal people would. And they just drive by, drop the body off and take off. And it's kind of shocking, but it happens so often at these hospitals.
You're right, Chuck. Sometimes they would hardly slow down. The body would be pushed out. They'd be still on the roll. Crazy. Yeah, that's so true. I saw in the movie here. So I know we in our class A's, we had those, we call them campaign hats. But in upstate New York, we actually had Stetsons that were kind of similar to this, that we had to actually wear every day, every time we got out of the car. But I know at the LA Sheriff's Department, we had campaign hats. I don't remember even getting one. Did you have one, Ron? Or you worked the special units that had to wear them, right?
Yeah. So when I was a drill instructor at Recruit Training Unit, we called it a cover. So that Smokey the Bear type hat. That was our standard uniform when you were outdoors. You would always be undercover. But never at patrol. We wouldn't even wear the uniform hats that came back later when some of the other sheriffs took over from other agencies, and they liked the way their old agency hat looked compared to the our cover was. But towards the end, I was never a fan of it, but I never checked the guys. You per policy were allowed to wear a baseball hat, if you were outdoors and it was sunny and everything else. But you would get guys that were, if it was cold and they were wearing beanies that had like the unofficial station symbol on it, or hats, and then they'd come in wearing it backwards or some crud. And I tend to be pretty lenient on things like that. And I would leave that up to the sergeants to do their job in the field on that. But yeah, baseball hats and beanies were probably more of what the guys were wearing, but never the campaign hat where they're looking like kind of Elmer
Yeah.
Fudd, where they got it like tilted way back. That's like a total jabroni move, in my opinion. Like if anybody that knows how to wear a cover was wearing their cover like that, you'd be like, this guy is a complete jabroni. But
Yeah.
I'm big on uniforms, Cliff. So when I was watching
Me
this
too.
movie and I was
Yeah.
looking at everybody's gun belt and all kinds of other stuff, I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
what a bunch of soup sandwiches. But it made for good time, especially when they were wearing short sleeves with clip-on ties and
Yeah.
all kinds of other nonsense. I was like, okay, it was kind of funny. But yeah, we never wore that hat out in the field.
Chuck, did you
I-
have to
I
wear a
was-
hat or?
I noticed the short sleeve and the tie too, but what I noticed the most was lack of keepers. Like they're not
Oh,
wearing
yeah,
any
yeah.
keepers, and the two belts, the Sam Brown and the underbelt, are always separated in the movie, obviously by design.
Well, that was kind of back in the day when my dad was on. He didn't have keepers for the longest time.
Yeah.
That was something they came up with many, many moons ago, or but my dad came on like in the mid to early 60s, and you can see pictures of him where his uniform belt is there, and then his gun belt like sags to the side of his gun and is
Yep.
almost
Oh,
kind of,
yeah.
I don't want to say like Wyatt Earpish, but you kind of look at it and you're like, dude, that's kind of weird. And he'd have like
Yeah.
some big old hog leg like Colt Python 357, on the side where it's on a swivel holster that's
yeah.
like down about like his knee level. And I never had anything like that, but I would just laugh. But yeah, all that stuff was like just like totally unsatisfactory. Like you looked at it, and I guess with how they were pranking and doing everything and not much police work, I was just happy that they were showing up with both belts and their uniform on, for the most part.
Somehow the Wyatt Earp and the Billy the Kid without the keepers, and it looks a lot different than these clowns in this one. Something's
Right.
different about it.
Yeah. There was a guy at Linwood, I can't remember his name. And man, he had, when we still had the wheel gun, he had a 6-inch, forgot what it was, and he had like the extended holster. So it was real low down by his knee. And I mean, he was like, they're never taking my wheel gun, man. He like refused to go along with converting for the longest time. He got away with it for probably a year and a half, 2 years, but they finally got him. But yeah, he had one of those swivel low right. I don't know what they called them, but it really hung low down by his knee. 6-inch.
Yeah, we called them by that time we called them drop holsters, but I'm sure that's what the
Yeah.
new kids were calling them when I came up. But yeah, it was a swivel drop holster where you could sit in the car and then you could just pull the gun and set it in your lap. So when you were driving, it would sit in your lap as opposed
Correct.
to when
it
was
would just
at patrol
flopped over on your lap.
and it would like eat your hip up because you'd be banging into whatever the that metal box that was right where the shotgun holder was.
Mm-hmm.
Did you wear hats, Chuck, where you were? Or
we were assigned that Class A ICAT and the jacket. It'd go in the closet, and I never wore the thing once my entire career.
Yeah, and back east, because there's probably so little to do and pay attention to, we were like, we'd get written up if we got out of the car without our hat on. So it was like a big thing. And then everybody was always messing with the hats, right? Those Stetson hats. People would steal your hat and fill it with water and put it in the freezer. And, they would do all sorts of crazy things with your hat, but it was a Stetson with a strap. You tried to keep it flat like a DI Marine kind of thing. But I remember guys would actually iron their brim so it was strictly straight,
You mentioned the freezer. I don't know why that reminded me of this. We had this deal. If you forgot your boots outside of your locker overnight, if you, for whatever reason, between shifts, you left them out, those things were guaranteed to be full of water in the freezer at your next shift.
Oh, man. That's crazy. All the pranks, which was kind of, it kind of relates to this movie. All these pranks that would happen. It kind of reminds me when we're showing some of these traffic stops and some of these guys. I love the meow thing. Meow, your license registration.
Well,
Did any of you guys ever see any of that when you're on your?
the banter between cops. I mean, there was a lot of pranks played on the public in the movie, but the banter and the pranks played on each other in a department was just relentless. It was
relentless. Yeah.
I mean, relentless to where some outsider looking in would call it a crime, the stuff that we would do to each other. But I think a lot of it is there's just so much stress and tension. And there's a lot of boredom when you work a graveyard shift. So you have a lot of time to come up with some creative pranks on each other. And it was just a normal part of business. Probably less so today. You'd probably get charged with hostile work environment or something today.
You remind me of a story, Chuck. So, and Ron, you're going to appreciate this because I forgot where we were. We were back in it used to be an industrial way or something. I think it became Steve Blair Way, but it was an industrial area where we would park near the end of our shift.
It was industry way.
Industry way. So we would park there, 6, 7 deep, just, like 20 minutes before we were going to gas up. We couldn't go in too early, right? So we'd go there, finish reports or whatever. But anyways, I have pictures of this. I think it's okay. The statute of limitations is over, but someone had found this like an inflatable. It was a stuffed animal, like a rabbit, like 6 feet long, and it was full of stuffing. The belly of the rabbit was like 4 feet high. And so there was a deputy who was in this industry way, parked with everybody else. Somebody brought in that stuffed rabbit, and that one deputy had his head back, eyes shut, and resting his eyes. And they cabled that rabbit to his back bumper. So then when we all said, well, let's take it in, we let him drive first. And so he's ahead of like 6 other police cars, and that rabbit is bouncing down Imperial Highway, and the stuffing is starting to fly out into the air. I can't imagine what people were thinking when they saw this row of police cars and one stuffed rabbit bouncing behind this. Anyways, it was a story that reminded me of that.
The problem nowadays is every single thing would be on video.
We'd be really in trouble.
Internet,
yeah. All right. Hypothetically, that happened. I'm going to disavow any knowledge. But Ron, you can imagine going down Imperial Highway in front of Imperial Courts with this stuffed rabbit, just breaking apart.
Well, what's funny is when I was in my heyday at Patrol was when Shaq and Kobe were three-peating for the Lakers.
Yeah.
And you would have all the street vendors. So me and my TO at that time, and then afterwards, later on, I would do it with my guys if the Lakers were in the World Championship, is we would put the rear window, we would put the Laker flag, the flags that would come up off of the car.
The window. Yeah.
And we actually got in a televised pursuit, and we were driving down the road, and how we got burned was you saw the Lakers flag on the freeway.
That's funny. Oh.
And dude, they got all aggro about it. The higher ups, they were like, what the heck? And so we may have influenced some folks to call in and say, man, that was so great that the cops are totally with us in the city and everything, but we still had to remove the flag. And then after it died down, I heard that it got put back on and everything else. But one of the pranks, and there was tons of them. If I could mention one, and I don't want to be the Rodney Dangerfield and getting no respect around here.
Please do it.
So when Farva comes in and he's got all the coffees, he's like, hey, who wants cream? And you can tell Farva's kind of this loose cannon, black sheep kind of dude that nobody likes. But, everybody needs a Farva on their team as we dive down into these characters. Well, when I was at Temple Station as a watch commander, I had a bunch of former Bureau guys. So like Special Enforcement Bureau, like SWAT guys. And you were not, how shall I say, immune to their joking regardless of rank.
Right.
God forbid you showed him it bothered you or anything. Well, there was one sergeant that would go way out of his way to be super nice to me, and him and I had tore our Achilles tendons, both tore our left Achilles tendons, and we met at the physical therapy place, and we would work out together. And just to kind of show you like my personality relative to him, those guys are known as very hard charger, alpha dog type dudes. So our 40-minute PT session would turn into like a 3-hour workout because I wasn't leaving before you left. And, it just made us better. And Reader's Digest version, once I went to patrol as a lieutenant, he was a sergeant and done some ridiculous amount of years at SEB. So I really appreciated his low-key approach, but when a tactical situation happened, I didn't even have to worry about it. I could like slow roll to get out there because I knew it would be handled appropriately and everything. So when I worked my county double, so we would work PMs to early, so I would just sleep at the station on that county double during day shift. He would ensure that I would have a cup of coffee. And I trusted the dude implicitly. And then I would grab that cup of coffee and I'd walk into briefing, and we'd do briefing. And every Saturday, and you would rotate like every 3 cycles. So like every month you would rotate your county double. And every time mine was on a Saturday, he went out of his way to make sure I had a coffee, from one of the local places. And I was like, okay, cool. And we would show up. I would show up, grab my coffee, walk into the briefing room and sit down. And we would do briefing. And he worked overtime on that Saturday. And so him and I would team up and just yuck it up and have a good time. Well, I noticed that when I go in there and I go to take a drink of my coffee, I wasn't really thinking. I slept in the bunk room. I go to take a drink of my coffee, and he has a penis and balls sketched on the cup, the top of my coffee. And it's not just a regular penis and balls, Cliff. Like, you could tell this dude had talent. Like,
Right.
he was,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying he was a syndicated artist, but he had curly little hairs, he had specs, he had all kinds of stuff. So, not to be outdone, I was sipping my coffee, noticed it, and I went over to the guys. I was like, hey guys, look, man, Sergeant so-and-so got me my coffee and everything. I was like, hey, he drew an elephant on my coffee cup, and I held it up and showed it to everybody. And so we have like brand new trainees that obviously they're not allowed to laugh at anything, and you could see they were absolutely dying. But he was like a dinosaur. He had at that time like 35 plus years on the department and still just enjoyed patrol. And so what I would do is I would come in, and during the briefings that I knew him and I were working together, I would have the trainees queue up on the drop down TJ Hooker, the former sitcom with who was Captain Kirk, but who played Captain Kirk. But Reader's Digest version, I would have them play clips of that because it was just so ridiculous and unsafe. And I would say it was this sergeant's footage of his patrol time and everything. So him and I kind of had this back and forth, and he gave it as good as he got it. But yeah, it was tons of fun, man.
So that reminds me, and I didn't like this, and so everybody knows who hasn't gotten a ticket. When an officer writes a ticket, they put all the information that's on the ticket, which is quite extensive. And then when you go up to the vehicle to issue the ticket, second or third copy down is the yellow copy that the driver gets. So you would rip that off and then hand it to the driver. I don't know how many times I went to pull that yellow copy out, and somebody had written on there that elephant, that penis and balls pictures, right? And I just happened to catch it before I gave it to the, and I would have to go and get that ticket, what do you call it? But, it would have to be officially, I forgot what you call it.
Yeah, you'd have to get it voided, and it took
voided.
a watch commanders.
Yeah. But, you wouldn't know until you went and pulled that copy out, so
Right.
Those kind of tricks went on all the time. How about you, Chuck? Any experiences with that?
Well, I was just noticing somebody posted the name you were looking for, Ron. It was William Shatner.
William Shatner. How could we forget that? Except that we're getting.
And I'm not that old, man. So like those guys are like a little bit before my time. But I was gonna say Leonard Nimoy, but I knew that was Spock. But no, I appreciate the comments from
William
folks that
Shatner.
are
Yeah, I
live
used to
with us.
love. That was a show I liked. I like TJ Hooker. I actually liked that.
Was it him that just flew up into space? Was it?
Yep,
William
that's right.
Shatner?
With he did.
Yeah.
With it was on the Blue Origin or something. I think it was with Bezos. I think he went.
Yeah. Interesting.
Well, at least he wasn't on that submarine.
There you go. Jeez. Thank God. And I forgot where I was going to go. Oh, there's always a guy. We had one in our academy, and there used to be a name for it. It was so Favre, his character would be like with a character from Police Academy. Remember that guy's name? He always had the brush cut, and he was always very, militant, and he wanted to be the super cop, basically. I can't remember the name, but he was called, people would call people that name, but Favre matches the description of that kind of guy on the department. We all have those. Did you have those, Chuck? And
Yeah, Yeah, I think Farva's that wannabe cop, that guy that was always a security guard at the mall, and somehow he slipped through the cracks and got hired, and he never quite could fit into the culture, but he's still a wannabe cop, and he wanted approval but could never get it. I know this guy, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I forgot the name of the character in the police academy, but there's a guy like that. We had one just like the one from the police academy, but same kind of guy. It would be like the brush cut, pants too short, white socks, black shoes. You know, the guy, I don't know. It's kind of that look.
Tackleberry. Somebody just posted.
Yeah, Tackleberry. Thank you.
Dude, whoever these folks are that you hired to be on live are lifesavers, Cliff.
They're lifesavers. Tackleberry. We had a Tackleberry in the academy.
Yeah. We would call folks like Farva, if they were in the academy, we would call them soup sandwiches. That would be the G-rated version of what we would call them and whatnot. But I wouldn't say like Tackleberry at least was like squared away on my recollection of police academy stuff. Like Farva is just a complete freaking, he's a mess, man. So he's even though he ends up being a traitor, like when they do the powdered sugar scene, and he's like, "Hey, I'll give you," when the chief, who is it, Grady or whatever his name is from Spurberry, he's like, "I'll give you your own car. We need some inside information," and he's like, "I'm all highway," meaning that he's like a state trooper or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately he ends up friggin' flipping on everybody, but he ends up redeeming himself, I guess. But that scene was hilarious, man, especially where it showed his junk, which looked like a miniature mushroom in a lion's mane or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't even know that was done by purpose, but I figured, knowing these guys from the Broken Lizard crew, that had to have been like, okay, we're gonna show this, and he was down for it, man. But that was I guess in homage to like First Blood, where they do the shower scene where they're showering him down. And he's like, "Sorry about the delousing stuff," and he's like, "It's powdered sugar," and he's like, "It tastes delicious," or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Those are just scenes where my wife woke up and was like, "Turn it down," and quit laughing.
Yeah.
I was thinking First Blood too. I was wondering if it was just me, but I thought that was the same scene.
Yeah, they bite a lot of scenes that are funny, where they kind of pay homage like subliminally. But I got to imagine, if you dive deep into it, that those scenes that either weren't loosely based on true stories from these guys were taken from like other movies and stuff.
Yeah,
it's funny. So when he's pleasuring himself and he's measuring himself with the radar unit, I was just thinking that we had guys in upstate New York. They would to use the radar for other purposes, right? So they would if they were going to be sleeping, they would park in a long lane in a field. Then they would set their radar at 5 miles an hour, right? So if anybody pulled into that field, the alarm would go off. It just kind of sparks. Yeah, I know, right? It was the way coppers come up with all these things to use their tools in different ways.
Well, it's working graveyards. It's similar to being in prison. You got a lot of time on your hands, and you can be creative.
Too much time. Yeah, yeah. We used to do some. Yeah, the downtimes. Yeah. It was funny. My sheriff in upstate New York, he never even liked. He goes, "I don't like to see two deputies together. It causes trouble. One call, one deputy." That was his theory, right? One call, one deputy. He didn't even like it.
We'd get in trouble that there's a certain restaurant. Well, it was IHOP, and anyone in uniform would go there, and probably because there's discounted food, if I remember right. But we were often forbidden to go there because there'd be all the local agencies. I mean, the paramedics, the fire department, anyone with a badge, because it was getting this discounted food. And somebody driving by would see 50 police cars outside, but it's really all these different jurisdictions, but it really looks bad,
Yeah. We went through the same thing, right, Ron?
Yeah. So we tried not to burn out our pop spots and whatnot. So we'd kind of rotate around, but yeah, there was always those friendly places. But again, like for the most part, and I would say this, that one of our North End folks loved going to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles over in LAPD's area. And so that would be about it, but we wouldn't poach. We'd pay full price there. But everybody, for the most part, respected, kind of your jurisdictional integrity, or what we call your RD, or reporting district, as it related to your pop spots.
Yeah.
Like we didn't go into LAPD area or Southgate or any of those other adjoining areas, and they kind of respected it. as well. So yeah, I would always tell folks to hey, rotate around, don't just burn one spot out.
Yeah.
And just because I heard, also don't sleep with the owner's wife, okay? Because that'll get things messed up
Yeah.
for guys too.
I always thought that was good advice.
Or beat the cashier up.
Yeah,
Also,
don't do that.
yeah.
Well, the movie just went past the best scene of the entire movie.
Oh, which one? Which one? I missed it.
Leader of Cola scene. It's just a classic scene.
That's funny.
Yeah, those restaurant scenes. I think at one time we only could have. I think we could have a maximum of 4 at a 7-Eleven. I think it was Temple, Ron. I remember that we would always we met so frequently at these places to get. I remember parking my car around the corner and somebody picking me up and bringing me into the 7-Eleven to have coffee with everybody, so that the sergeant wouldn't see our more than 4 cars.
That's funny.
Yeah,
you got to love your micromanagers.
Yeah, I know. That's why it was funny. I tried not to be that when I was. Yeah. My one of my sergeants told me, I supported you becoming a sergeant because I wanted you to have the headache of supervising people like yourself. Jack,
well,
did you end up go ahead.
No, I always told myself that I'd rather have somebody that I'd have to rein back than somebody I'd have to kick in the butt.
That's right. Yeah.
And then, obviously you empower and or do various things as it relates. And I don't need to know everything, but you know who to empower and entrust with the if
That's
the
right.
sheriff was standing there right there, give this answer, and then you knew who kind of your still very good cops were, but just weren't really polished in the other areas. So with that, not to get away from the spirit of this movie, I guess if you want to say any of the characters, Ramathorn, as crazy as that sounds, is the second in command for the Vermont Highway Patrol.
Yeah.
And he's the mature one that, is out there, when Mac is running around in a disguise, they go on a high speed pursuit and is busting rounds out and all kinds of other stuff. And it's kind of funny, but you know who those guys are and you identify as a supervisor. And then you would hope that the deputies that are 10-8 or in service at that time look at the in service and then don't give the good supervisor a bunch of freaking nonsense, so they look and they're like, oh, so-and-so is my supervisor, I got to look out for him. Or they could look at it and go, so-and-so is my supervisor, doesn't look like we're going to be doing anything or taking any calculated risk. But that's my recollection of things as it relates to supervisors and either having to rein people back. But I will tell you, in the interest of like Farva, there were permanent dispatcher guys either due to uses of force or too many shootings or just boneheaded decisions that were that guy that literally loved still to come to the station and would drive past like 5 or 6 other sheriff stations because they wanted to be at a station that was super busy, but they were just the desk jockey.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And they were good guys, but
and they were good people. Yeah, they were good-hearted people, and they wanted to work. Yeah.
When you were talking about leadership, I saw Ramathorn in the movie kind of as the guy who's not a leader by rank, but kind of the de facto leader of the crew. And there was always guys at my departments that had the stripes, but that's not the guy that the people would go to for advice,
Right.
Yeah. We used to.
And I like.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I liked how they kept once Farva was going to go out into the field where Ramathorn was trying to like dish him off on Mac and Foster. And he's like, hey, man, let's switch it up. It'll be fun. It'll be this. And they were like, no. They're like, no way. And then Farva comes out and he's like, hey, man, why are you guys talking about me? I know you're talking about me. But, just a funny dude that like when you have him in the car, like Ramathorn, even though they're on a traffic stop, they're sitting there, he's writing and they're talking about, the meow joke. And he's like, oh, I'll show you, and he's like, do car ramrod. He's like Ramathorn and Rod for Rodney Farva. And he's like, do car ramrod. And that made me like really, really funny because the senior drill instructor as a drill instructor in the academy is known as the ramrod.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that, I always thought, I was like, oh, car ramrod. And he wouldn't do it. And he's like, oh, man, but you saw it. I had it written down. And he's like, oh, I must have missed it. But in my reading, what's funny is they didn't prep them on the scene. But reportedly, the 2 people in the minivan on that stop are Farva's, his character's real life parents.
Oh my
And he
God.
came up and shot the scene cold when he comes up with the chicken fucker freaking thing and he's
Yeah.
screaming and yelling at him. They had no idea that that was going to happen. And that was his mom and dad as the drivers there. So they really had no idea what was going to occur.
I didn't
And he
read
comes
that.
up and they were
Oh.
just like, hey, we're going to do this scene. And he came up and did it. And so that was kind of one of the things when I was reading up on some of this stuff that just popped out. And I was like, no way.
So I wonder if they must have done a lot of improv. I imagine they allowed him to do improv, and a lot of it showed up in the movie. Did you read anything about that? Or?
I don't know of improvisation, but it was all kind of that like sketch comedy type stuff. And I
Yeah.
did read some other stuff that their goal, because it was just so like over the top, that they tried to do a joke every 6 seconds that they
Yeah.
were on there, you know. So this group, like when I had mentioned Broken Lizard, they're a group that has done a variety of things. Like if you've seen Tacoma Fire or FD, which is kind of like a Reno 911, but for fire sitcom. I think it has like it's a Fox series.
Yeah.
Funny as hell. And and I call them my second responder folks. We have people that live in the neighborhood where I'm at that were retired firefighters. So I always call them my second responders, you know, because we love them so much. And I say that with the vast majority of respect, as much as that can be. But Tacoma Fire is hilarious. And actually 3 or 4 of the characters that are on Super Troopers, they are writers and or star in Tacoma Fire. And Ramathorn, Mac, and some of the other dudes are the same writers and producers from Super Troopers that did Tacoma Fire, and Tacoma Fire is hilarious.
Oh yes.
And I don't even have to know fire stuff, but they're more current than say this movie that's 20 something years old. So they get into like when somebody shows up and wants to file some gender sensitivity complaint or something, and how they handle it and everything else.
Oh yeah.
It's just totally inappropriate, but totally seriously funny.
Anything to add to that, Chuck?
Well, you say you're reading stuff about this. I was surprised. I read up on this movie last night, and the budget for this thing was just over $1 million, and it made like $23 million or something. I mean, it was insane.
Yeah, it's a slow burn cult classic, you know, like it was DVD sales and everything else that kind of pushed it, you know. And then if you want to get on how it came out on Sundance, I heard one of Cliff's unknown mentors or idols, Harvey Weinstein, if you remember that name.
Yeah.
They were seen talking to Weinstein at the bar right before their movie was shown, and then they showed the movie Super Troopers at Sundance, and everybody was like, dude, we need to get on board with this movie because the dudes that produced this movie were talking to Weinstein at the bar hanging out, so we know this is going to get a big push kind of thing and everything else. And then it did well out the gate, you know, and was individually financed by just a single dude, is my understanding. And then ultimately it got passed around, much like say Animal House or Caddyshack. You know, you had these DVDs just go from dorm room to frat house to everything else, and then they just built up this, you know, for lack of a better word, kind of cult following.
And hey, and we're on the hour here, so we're going to take our first break, everybody, and then we'll come right back here after the break. I'll go to the producer.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience. The exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives. And moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Ink graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are looking at the movie Super Troopers, and I've got my co-host with me, Ron Daly. I got Chuck with me, both California law enforcement veterans. And Ron, you had mentioned the 6 minutes, every 6 minutes they wanted a joke. It's funny, I took a comedy class when I was doing stand-up comedy, and they had figured out through analyzing headliners, when comedians got to the headliner status, they were actually getting to the point where they're getting a laugh every 6 seconds. I wonder if maybe that was some kind of scientific thing that came across the industry, and maybe people in the movie business picked up on that also. Are any of these guys stand-up comics? I don't recognize any as being stand-up comedians. Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that they were a group that was formed up at Colgate University in New York. It's kind
I
of
didn't
where
know
all
that.
these dudes met, and they had kind of tryouts and everything else. And ultimately kind of developed this core crew of guys that's known as Broken Lizard. So if you see them, that's who they are. And I think it's a group of like 5 or 7 of them. I think every one of them's a character, at least as it relates to our Vermont Highway Patrol dudes. Excuse me.
So I got one of the Cam's crash course. This movie is hilarious. They write in the chat, I live in Vermont, and this was a must watch. I don't know if you mentioned this, but it was actually shot mostly in New Hampshire, the next state over. I wondered because I recognize the ruralness and of course the greenery of. I knew it had to be back east somewhere. And now, of course, Ron, you mentioned Colgate, and that's back east, right? Colgate.
Yeah, it's in New York. So like all these guys were like college buddies and stuff, and they did.
I saw Broken Lizard in the credits, so I didn't know what that was. It was kind of a comedy.
Yeah, it's like a cohort.
Group.
They're the ones that did Tacoma Fire. Like I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
I was surprised it was filmed in Vermont. I was actually born in Vermont.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I left when I was 5 years old. Haven't been back, but I was surprised to see that.
Yeah, I want to get to Vermont sometime in the fall, but I want to see all the leaf peepers, they call them. So yeah, wow, that's great. So yeah, funny stuff in this movie. I like you were mentioning I had an Ike jacket, Chuck, and I loved my Ike jacket. You weren't supposed to wear it only during your Class A's when you had long sleeve and a tie, but I used to wear it all the time in Linwood Patrol. I just liked the looks of it. It was so clean, it fit well,
Where we were at when you were what we called a boot, a rookie, brand new person, you had to wear the long sleeve and tie.
Yep.
Other than that, no one ever wore it. I don't know, it was some sort of hazing thing or something. But the funny thing, the people in the street, the people that regularly deal with the police, they would start calling you boot because they knew that meant you were a rookie, right?
Yeah, that's we would call new people the same thing. We would actually, as a camaraderie thing. I don't know, Ron, if you did this at any of the stations. I think we might have done it even at Temple. It was like once a month or once. I know at Linwood we did it like once a week on the midnight shift. We all wore long sleeve and ties just as a camaraderie thing. Even some supervisors, and you look sharp. Some supervisors they didn't like it. They felt like, why are you guys doing that? And I don't know if you were able to do that. You'd think you'd be happy we were wearing Class A's, but.
Well, what do cops like? They hate things. They hate change, and they hate things the way they are.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So what we did, Cliff, was at Century Station, we had 14 guys on our memorial wall. So what we would do is on the anniversaries of their death, you would go out and wear long sleeves and ties on the month and day for whatever it was. So typically you were the vast majority of our guys, which I guess I don't know, maybe our clinical psychologist Chuck could answer this, is that the vast majority of those guys were killed during the summer months. So it would be, when it's hotter and warmer and people are out and they're restless and everything else. But So in the summertime, especially if you were working PMs overlap and it was like 100 plus when you logged on at like 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you'd be in your big monkey suit, getting after it. And like another thing that just popped in my head when you guys were talking about your eye jacket, which I don't know what that is, but we got jackets when I was
The
on the
Ike,
academy.
the Ike jacket,
Uh,
the Eisenhower.
Eisenhower. Okay, well, so what would happen is the old crusty sergeants that would like go outside and smoke, they would wear the jacket with the furry collar.
Yeah, I
And
don't know.
that meant
Yeah,
that they were like triple OG, and they'd be out hanging out. When they'd go outside, even though it was warm, they'd throw their jacket on and go out with the furry collar on and smoke their cigarettes. And I can remember as a young deputy, like some of the other deputies being like, "Oh man, that guy's got like 19 years on the department or whatever it was," and you were like, "Man, that guy's like super old," and but I can remember that when you guys were talking about your jackets and whatnot.
I remember in Linwood, if somebody wore their furry collar, that was like, oh my God, that would not be allowed, let alone have your window up. Those are like things that never happened. And if you did that, like, oh, this guy did not train here.
Well, what's funny is actually is an old Firestone thing, because Firestone Station and Linwood Station merged to become Century Station. So a lot of those, how shall we say it, traditions bled over.
Yeah.
And
I like that traditions.
yeah, a Firestone deal was to wear your long sleeve Class A, but you would roll the sleeves up on it and cuff the collar.
Yeah.
And there was at least one other dude that still went 10-8 with his helmet on without the visor.
Yeah.
So he would bring all his stuff out, and then you would know that those guys were the old Stony Boys or Firestone dudes,
Yeah.
because they would throw their helmet and back
Oh,
in the
yeah.
back seat in the window. And then SEB took that over much later, because a lot of those dudes were Firestone guys. So later on, if you saw a radio car with the helmet in the back up on the window right there, you would be like, "Oh, dude, that's a dude from SEB, or it's an old Firestone dude," because that's what they used to do when they'd go to booking or whatever. They take their helmet off and pop it in the window back there. But there was a lot of traditions like that, whether it was a jacket or a helmet or rolling your sleeves up, and that was frowned upon. Like, I will tell you, especially once the tattoo policy came in, and like dudes would be sleeved and they'd roll their stuff up.
Yeah.
And before the tattoo policy came into effect, and then obviously when the tattoo policy came into effect, there was like this huge, like Chuck said, they hate change, and they hate things to say the same. There was dudes that didn't comply with it, and there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of verbal and written counseling and documented counseling and everything else to get people to go along with it.
You remind me of these things. Sometimes I wonder if I should talk about them. But we were in Linwood, and it was a Mexican wedding reception, a very large. And me and my TO, we got to the scene, and everybody's getting out of the car, and he's going, put your helmet on. And so my helmet, yeah, put your helmet on. He goes, watch these guys. This is a Mexican wedding reception. Soon the Budweiser will be flying. Watch these guys with no helmets. And the sergeant gets there, and it's a sergeant he's very zen. His name was House. He was an international liaison guy, and he was there. He just recently promoted. Hey guys, hey, let's go in with this, calmly. And so my TO is saying, watch this guy. And so he's trying to orchestrate a kind of a calm, and now glass is breaking out of the house where this is at. Next thing you know, a Budweiser hits this sergeant on the side of the head. And his last words were, "Get him." And see, my TO said, always at a Mexican wedding, that Budweiser is going to fly. But he knew, get the helmet on. So when you talk about that, it was just, I won't say anything more, because that Mexican wedding ended up with about 38 lawsuits that probably are still going on today.
Well, in Linwood, we had El Ferion, or EF, and they used to have like all kinds of stuff there, and that would be good for some unrest and shootings and all kinds of other nonsense. Yeah. But what was funny, it popped in my head, and in this show, obviously it's totally racist now and everything else, but when Ramathorn, when you said Mexican, it reminded me when they were at the restaurant, and thought he was the Spurberry guys, after they chugged the syrup, the Spurberry guys were over there, and they walked up to say hi, and they were like, "Oh, waiter." And
Yeah.
and then he was like ordering enchiladas and everything, and it was a slight to say that Ramathorn looked like he was Mexican. And he
Yeah.
was like, "I'll take enchiladas and everything else." And I thought that was hilarious. And
Yeah.
then when he was in briefing, his own captain was like, "Hey, how do they do it in Arabia, anyways?" And thinking he was like an Arab. And I just thought like those kind of slights, like even I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times like my Mexican colleagues would use some white joke and we'd
Yeah.
use something in reverse, and it was all as long as nobody overheard it. And this is obviously Ron Daly, the non-supervisor, talking. As long as nobody overheard it, it was like all in good fun. But those parts were extremely funny, in my opinion, where you just have a dude that we'll just say is brown, and he just gets lumped in with like every kind of ethnicity you could possibly imagine. I'm surprised they didn't have like a Slurpee machine joke or something like that in there as well.
Yeah.
I imagine all those days are gone now. I doubt those kind of things are going on anymore.
No. I'm going to ask Chuck the makeup of his. It's funny because obviously this is in Vermont. And of course, when I was in upstate New York, it was all, first, the county was mostly white demographics. And it's funny when I hear this systemic racism, because I'm thinking the LA Sheriff's Department was like 65% Hispanic and maybe 12% white and 8% black and 5% Asian. But, we were the minority, if anything. But how about, did you work on diverse departments, Chuck?
Well, the town I lived in, Santa Maria, it's at least 70+% Hispanic community.
Wow.
And so I always would make a joke that I'm the minority, right? Like,
you would
get
be. Yeah.
special privileges for being a minority.
Right?
So I can tell you a funny story, Cliff.
Please.
My grandparents are from Santa Maria, and they've since
really?
passed away.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and so when I found out, so my dad did 49 and a half years in law enforcement. So my dad's mom, my grandmother, lived in Santa Maria, and my grandfather was a retired warrant officer as a medic in the Navy. And so you kind of got between my dad and him a very raw, unfiltered deal. So my grandmother was always very, very sweet and like innocent. And I went to school and got my 4-year degree, and I came back home to study and prepare for the medical, for the MCAT, for the entrance, because I was going to go to medical school. And then I ended up becoming a deputy, right? So with that, I go and visit my grandmother. And my grandmother, who was this nice, sweet, innocent lady, God rest her soul, was salt of the earth, man. So when I told her I was going to be a cop, there was a huge influx of Hispanics into Santa Maria. And I didn't know the demographics at the time. She was retired, very well traveled. They had an import, like a Far Eastern import company. So they would always have like, and they traveled abroad based off of, my grandfather. But my grandmother wanted to have a serious conversation. And I just graduated college. This is about maybe like 1994, 95. And she sits me down and she's like, "Okay, you got to be very careful." And they called me Ronnie, because even though I was in my 20s, I was still known as Little Ronnie. And she's like, "Ronnie, you got to be very careful." And this is what she said, just for the sake of accuracy. She goes, and this will be a slur, I guess you could say, that is like way in everybody's back pocket. And this was the advice my grandmother, the sweetest lady that I ever knew, gave me. She goes, "Watch out for those beaners because they're dangerous." And she was like 80. She was like 80 something years old. And like, I wouldn't say I was shocked and appalled, but I was kind of like taken aback. Like I was like, "Okay, Graham." She's like, "They'll cut your neck." She like got all into it. And I was laughing, but she called him a beaner. And I hadn't heard that from like until like I was like in grade school in single digits age wise. And that was just a funny story based off of that as it relates to Santa Maria and the Hispanic population that's there and everything else.
Well, Santa Maria had it changed. It was like kind of a ranching community, and then it turned into agriculture. She had a lot of migrant farm labor, but you would get a lot of, this is probably why she thought that there was a lot of Hispanic gang culture,
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh yeah. It was pretty, it's always changing, but that's probably where she's getting that view from,
Oh yeah. Cause that seemed like she probably grew up with that terminology. I don't know what the history of that would, because it could have came from the agricultural way, or it could have came from some other slight. I don't know the history of that slang term. I know it's
Yeah, I didn't
pejorative.
either, but I knew it wasn't like a good term,
No,
but she
right.
was. But
Yeah.
so when she had said that and Chuck had mentioned Hispanic in Santa Maria, I was like, dude, it just immediately took me back to that conversation when I was a
Yeah.
young, impressionable kid coming out of college thinking I was going to change the world. And here I am on Morning Coffee with Cliff.
Yeah. And I never, of course, I never saw anyone that was Mexican until I was in California. We didn't have any in upstate New York. We had Puerto Ricans. So
What part of town do you remember where they lived? I'm curious if you remember.
So the name of the street was Mooncrest. And it was a
Okay.
real quiet, off the deal. But I could remember going. There was a retired NFL football player, I believe, whose family owned some real well-known breakfast place that we would go eat, and it had like all the astronaut memorabilia on the wall because I guess they used to launch rockets from the local, I guess, Air Force Base or whatever it is that's kind of out in that area. What is it, Vandenberg maybe?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, because
Vandenberg, yeah.
Vandenberg back in the days you're talking about in the 90s, it was being set up to launch the space shuttle.
Well, the
And
space
so,
shuttle they would transport it there because I remember going and seeing it with my grandparents way back
yeah.
when.
I saw it on top of the plane. You know how they would transport it on top of the plane, but that the whole area, Lompoc and San Maria, was really booming because they were setting up for the space shuttle. And then once the space shuttle blew up, the Challenger, it just shut the whole thing down. And it was nothing happened there until Elon Musk started launching all the rockets out of here, and it's kind of picked back up, become like a commercial space launch center.
Crazy. Wow. Yeah, we're even getting kind of, it's funny, and they were getting lackadaisical. I'm on the space coast of Florida, so they call it. And so that's where I mean, we have launches for SpaceX probably every 3 days, just to it's to the point. Yeah.
It feels the same way here. It's that business is booming. I mean,
yeah, it's to the point where we don't even. I have an app, so I know because people here go out on their balconies or they go out on the beach, have a drink, and watch it. Because we're 20 miles this side of Canaveral, south of Canaveral, and sometimes we forget. And so in the middle of the night, we'll just hear, the windows will shake, and we'll hear the rumbling. And we go, "Oh, there must have been a launch. I didn't pay attention."
well, see, you're not in California because my first thought is we're having an earthquake, even though it's so common, right?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, so it's funny because people say, "Are you worried about the hurricanes?" I go, "Not really. Come on, think about all the earthquakes. You don't even know that's coming with a hurricane. I got 3 days notice. I could get out of here." A little bit different, but yeah, crazy, man. It was a wild movie, man. Super Troopers. Anything else about? It seemed like I was trying to notice a couple times I saw badges that didn't match, or anything more on the uniforms. They were kind of like you said. It was a hot mess. Some of those uniforms.
To me, I'm going to bring it up again. That Leader of Cola scene. I just think it's the best comedy scene ever done. But I used to teach report writing at the police academy, and that would be that scene. The Leader of Cola would be my first day. They'd have to write a report on that scene, so I'd play it and make them read the report.
That's great.
Try to lighten the mood and make it a little fun instead of all business, And so I've watched that scene hundreds of times for this class,
Wow. Yeah, I loved it when I got into leadership in the sheriff's department. We would review these movies for leadership types, but this actually would be a movie you could actually review as a leadership perspective, don't you think, Ron?
Yeah, well, I would say that there's some, folks that are in leadership positions in police departments that are quite comical, and how they got to that spot, God only knows. But yeah, it would be having. So the soup du jour when I was coming up, either promoting to sergeant, then lieutenant, or going to like training officer school, all the post mandated stuff, is for whatever reason it was to show like a leadership movie where there was conflict. So like Hunt for Red October was one, and then what was the one with Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington, where they were on the sub together?
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of it, but it was where they were on a nuclear sub, and I know one of your guys will pop on there and give the title.
Yeah.
But they did Glory, and they did some of these other ones, and I'll be honest with you, they'd turn the lights out and half the place would be totally asleep for like 2 hours in the dark, because we used to do those meetings and those schools in the old Gold Star restaurant, which at that time had a bar attached to it,
Yeah,
if you remember back in the day.
I remember.
And we would watch those films, and nobody would care about anything. So like if you played Super Troopers and you were just kind of one of those nerds, at least they would probably laugh about it and have a good time, and then you could like do one of the characters, or
Yeah.
something like that. But yeah, there was a lot of like good character things and everything as it related to leadership or lack thereof. But just every chance they had a chance to do the right thing, instead of doing the right thing and like doing police work, they would just do some prank and like cut it up and do something like totally stupid. But
Yeah.
yeah, I enjoyed it. But um, I think I would rather have their style of leadership than some of the other leadership that I thought, when people thought they were super serious and doing the right thing, when they were completely,
Yeah.
just unknowingly ignorant to some things.
You mentioned Denzel Washington, one of the best actors ever, but you want a lack of leadership movie would be him in Training Day. I mean, that would
Yeah.
Oh,
that
yeah.
would be an example.
Well, he had strong leadership. It's just he
That's
was
true.
crooked. He was crooked and criminal.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you get past all the crimes under the color of authority, he did display some really good leadership and whatnot. But
Was that supposed to be loosely based off the Rampart thing, or do you guys know?
well, so what's funny and was, I went to middle management school as a lieutenant. You have to go to like, I think it's like 180 hours or 120 hours post mandated training, and one of the guys was partners at, I believe it was San Francisco PD. Off the top of my head, was an undercover dude, and his partner was who they loosely based Denzel Washington's character off of. And the dude, according to his partner, because we would go out afterwards, because you'd be down there a week at a time and hit a watering hole or a baseball game or something like that. And his partner was an Asian dude that had a long ponytail, like a real long ponytail, and like all the way down to like his butt long. And then obviously, I think they sprinkled some of that stuff in, culture wise. And I guess you could say that it would be Rampart. I don't know much about Rampart. When that was all going, I was a jail deputy, so Rafael Perez and his partner Nino Durden were coming in and out of custody all the time, and we had to kind of protect them because it was really noteworthy, and they were cops. So I would have a chance to chat them up a little bit. Nino Durden was very sketchy and quiet, but Rafael Perez was a pretty cool cat. I mean, I never turned my back on him, but he was always real laid back and easy to deal with. But yeah, they had the tattoo thing and the undercover thing and the ends justify the means thing. So I guess if what's true in all the stuff reported at Rampart, I guess it kind of loosely mimics that as well. But yeah, I'd heard that character was based off a undercover San Francisco PD detective.
Interesting. Those guys, they must still be in custody, I'd imagine, right?
I don't think so. I think, and again, I yucked it up quite a bit with them because it just interested me, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word. And I would just put those guys in the cell straight across from me because I worked the Old Side Court line, and you'd just be able to see the dude. So you didn't have to worry about having to go back and do your checks like on a hard cell that were mandated per Title 15. So you could just sit the dude in front of you and lock the gate. And as you're doing your paperwork, and he was low key, nothing to worry about. Like we did that with Robert Downey Jr. and everything, etc. But Rafael Perez, if you remember, took a deal, rolled over on everybody, and that's what broke. And they dismissed thousands of dope cases. So I want to say he got 5 years.
Oh,
and
really?
then some of the I want to say some of the other.
Wasn't there allegations of homicide involved with that, or am I confusing that with something else?
Well, if you remember Javier Ovando, not to get too much off topic, Javier Ovando was, I believe, an 18th Street gangster, because that's who Rampart butted up against, where him and Nino Durden, his partner at that time at Crash, the Criminal Resource Against Street Hoodlums is what I think that acronym stood for, was they shot a guy, had an on-duty shooting, and he had a 22 sawed-off 22 that had a big old magazine in it, and the serial numbers were filed off of it. And so the shooting was determined to be all good. And then once it was determined that, or he was put under suspicion that he was going to go to prison for stealing dope out of the dope locker at LAPD, he said, "Hey, I'll cut a deal, and what if I could give you unjustified shootings?" And so then the DA was like, "Okay, yeah, we'll make a deal, blah, blah, blah." And one of the shootings he gave him was the Javier Ovando shooting, which they paralyzed the dude, shot him in the head, the whole 9 yards. He didn't die. And forensics was able to pull up the serial numbers off of that rifle that was on him. And when they ran the rifle in AFS, or the automated firearm system, and I knew their attorney, I won't get into his name, but he represented me on a case, not nearly as bad as theirs, okay? So I'm still gainfully employed, but we had the same attorney at one point. And what happened was they determined when they ran it through AFS, when they ran the history of the gun, that it was ran like 4 months earlier by Nino Durden in his car. And Rafael Perez
That's
later
right.
came forward and
Yeah.
said, "Hey, man, we put that rifle on him during the shooting." And Nino Durden couldn't remember not Nino Durden, Javier Ovando couldn't remember anything because he got shot in the head and everything else. And I want to say they immediately pulled old boy out of custody because he was doing like 20 something years for assault with a deadly weapon against cops, and was wheelchair ridden, and they cut him like a $20+ million check. And he went out and bought this yellow Humvee and was constantly getting jammed up and pulled over by the cops. So he had this tricked out Humvee with rims on it and everything. And he was constantly getting harassed by the cops. But it doesn't surprise me he still ran into problems. But yeah, there was a variety of those kind of stories as you followed it amongst, trips to Vegas, affiliations.
The chief chimed in, our normal host, and he said that they rewrote the script to mirror Rampart, and he also said thanks for us for covering and covering the movie. So Chief says good job, and they rewrote the script for Training Day to mirror Rampart. I didn't know that, so chime in with that. Hey Chuck, you have some books, or you have a book you wrote?
Yeah, one of them is, well, several of them, but one of them is about police shootings. So I kind of interviewed several.
What's the name of that book? What's the name of that book?
Shots Fired. I think I can't remember the subtitle, Psychology of Officer Involved Shootings or something like that. And it kind of highlights several officers who involved in shootings and what they experienced. And then I wrote a couple other books about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think I have Shots Fired. As a matter of fact, can they get that on Amazon, or where's that available?
Yeah, I might have it here. I can't remember here it is. Looks like this.
Oh yeah, Shots Fired. I think I read that book because that's good. So it's funny. So you talk about Training Day, and then do you remember 10-8 was a movie that was about the sheriff's department? Ernie Hudson was in it. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. And then I remember Deputy as well, if you could stomach watching it for a while.
Oh, Deputy. Yeah. Well, so when I wrote my book, I thought that show was going to take off. So I remember I got the font for my book. I made it exactly like the font on the show, thinking, oh, that'll help me with sales. But so Chuck, I don't know if you had to deal with this. Do you see this badge? It says California Deputy on it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously I was an LA County Sheriff Sergeant, and I'm writing a memoir on my life. I should have the real one here. But anyways, of course, I have my New York badge, and I had my LA County Sheriff badge on. And then I got a letter in the mail from the LA Sheriff's Legal Division. I have a cease and desist on your book. You are not allowed to use the copyrighted image of the badge. I actually had to make a fake badge. It was okay to have a fake badge on there, but I couldn't have the real badge to accurately represent where I worked. Can you imagine that? So I had to make up a fake
That'd be
badge.
frustrating, right? I mean, it could be a picture of your own badge that you own, right?
Yeah, and you would think they wouldn't want me to have something that wouldn't accurately depict, but I was reminded of that because of the movie 10-8, that they were actually required, the sheriff's department made them blur out the badge, the bear, and the side of the sheriff's car, which is so ridiculous. With all these LAPD movies and stuff, they use their actual badges and whatnot.
Do you know what I see now? I'm curious what you guys think. I see this young generation. They take the selfies, take a picture of themselves in uniform, and they blur out maybe just the badge or something, or the patch, but they're in full uniform, and it's like, to me, that's such a I guess I'm from a different generation. I would never have done that, and now they're all doing it. I guess it's allowed. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, imagine this film, Super Troopers, if they did like another like a part 4 or whatever, part 3 or whatever they haven't done yet, and they do it, in the current times where they're able to take selfies and TikToks, and even
Yeah.
if you remember like all
Yeah.
the stupid little dances they do next to their car that the younger generation
Oh
was
my
doing, and
God.
then the
That
Running
drives me
Man,
nuts.
and they just look like a bunch of shaved circus animals performing, where I was never a big fan of that. And I'll get off
The,
my soapbox, but I just thought all that stuff was just a
to me, it
and the
drives me insane because
yeah, the management supported it, and nobody got
well,
fanged for that.
to me, if I'm a tax-paying citizen, I don't want the cops doing song and dance. I want them out
Yeah.
there arresting the guy that stole the stereo out of my car. I don't want them wasting their time with that nonsense. It's just, to me, that is the opposite of community
Yeah.
policing. It's just
That was
so
my
obnoxious.
that was my original statement about these kind of movies where they try to, in the efforts of buffoonery, to make fun of law enforcement and the profession, which is the reason why I didn't think it should be allowed to be done. But I come from that old school where, you shouldn't even be touching the officer's uniform without being arrested. But come from a different time. So yeah,
Yeah,
I just don't like
I,
that.
I want at least when I was young and I looked up to the police, I saw them as intimidating, like
Yeah.
strong, confident. And now you're using the word buffoonery with some of these song and dance. It's like, I don't know, it's just different world. I guess I'm the old guy telling the
Yeah.
kids to get off my lawn now, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I don't know what you would call it, but it's they've lost the authoritarian image that is really required when we need things to be taken care of for us. And just people that forget that the police are us, right? Their mom, dad, their son, daughter, brother, sister. They're not people that have come from a different planet that are oppressing us. They're people that have decided to be taken from our community. So while we do our thing, we're free to do it in safety because of what they're willing to do. But that has not become the mentality, like you said, Chuck, because of the image painted by the media and culture.
What's your book about, Cliff?
It's just a memory. It's just a memoir of my experience coming from a department in stories in rural upstate New York, where I had car deer accidents, then to coming to Los Angeles, and so the different perspectives of and my experiences of that, where I remember sitting in my police car in upstate New York, seeing an ad in the police product news, ride the strip, we pay the gas, and then I ended up being on the strip with LA County paying the gas, and so that's basically, it was a true account of my experience.
How did you write it? Did you sit down at a typewriter and just start going, or how did you put it together?
I got into like self-publishing and learning, wow, you can actually do that and put your effort out into the world. And so initially I had, based on what we had just talked about, I put out a book called The Truth About Cops and Why You Should Trust Them, just because of my experience working recruitment, and my wife was a background investigator, and just how to debunk this image of, oh, they just pick people off the streets and they don't go through any background investigation. There's no filtering of who we have. And so I put that out there, and I just liked the idea of publishing and marketing the book. And then I decided to write the memoir. So that's how I got into it. But I have a whole, I used, I don't know what you use as a software. I use Scrivener, and now I use Atticus. And so I could go on and on about self-publishing. I've spent hundreds of hours learning about it.
I always thought it'd be hard to write a memoir about myself. Because like, what do I include? It's got to be a little raw to be entertaining, but where's the line that's too far? And I don't know if you know who Neil Strauss is. He's a real famous author. He wrote The Game. But I was talking to him one time, and he said your first draft you write for yourself. That
no one else sees it.
See. And then you go and edit draft 2, and that's okay. I'm going to remove the stuff that other people shouldn't see. And that was really good advice. It was really good advice.
Yeah, I've heard that from several people. And if you haven't watched it already, there's a Netflix special that's called Sly. It's about Sylvester Stallone, which is really raw and really a great. He was just on a podcast with his daughters where he talked about it. And, you know, he wrote the first, I think it was the first Rocky in 3 days. He goes, what's the big deal about that? It's the rough draft. I mean, no one sees it anyways. You just start writing it and then you go back to fix it. So it's kind of the mentality you should have.
That interview with his daughters was better than the one.
It was better than the documentary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because when I wrote these jiu-jitsu books, I was curious about what makes a world-class fighter, and I'm always a fan of Sylvester Stallone and what made him write the characters Rocky and Rambo, and that interview explains
everything.
the why he wrote them.
Why?
I just thought it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you saw that.
Have you seen that?
Yeah. So I watched the Sly one, very well done, and another one, even though I've fallen off the wagon with the dude because of how he came out about locking down and mandating vaccines and everything.
You're going to say Arnold.
Arnold Schwarzenegger had a decent one too. But if I could go back to something real quick, Cliff, just because I don't even know how to write my own name. I only barely know how to write my own name and haven't written a book yet, even though that might be something in the works because you guys got my juices flowing here, is when we were talking about kind of the rough and tumble image and how things have changed and your wife being a background investigator and everything else is...
and I work with your wife at recruitment. I work with your wife.
Yeah. And so with my background at recruit training and stuff, I think probably where we've kind of seen this reflection of what's coming out in the current, and this is a general statement, law enforcement, is that we're not, in my opinion, law enforcement when I came on was kind of a higher calling.
Right.
Okay. There was like the measurables, you know, like a psychological evaluation and some of these other things, but otherwise you weren't doing that job because you were going to make the most money. You weren't doing that job even though you were probably really bright and disciplined and everything else. You were doing that job because your why was really, really, really big. And now how they're recruiting and or selecting is they're not looking at those innate qualities that could be revealed in a psychological evaluation, et cetera, and or job interest. You know, people that come on are looking for, and I don't even say this sarcastically, a good dental plan, you know, a decent, steady government job. And then the way we're recruiting is we're recruiting in order to be like very forward thinking and stuff. I would say that generally speaking, that we're recruiting for a certain gender or a certain ethnicity or a certain, you know, fill in the soup du jour, like sexual orientation, whatever the latest, greatest hot topic is, in order to try to make a square peg fit in a round hole. And now you're starting to see that being portrayed out on the streets. And I think the missing component of that is allowing the training folks after they've been hired, even though I think that selection part of it and that background is important, that when they're in training, not that I want it to be like a Navy SEALs, you know, like BUDS or basic underwater demolition training where we have like an 80% attrition, but I can tell you as a DI, the attrition levels for certain folks, it was on a board that was broken down. And if you went above certain numbers attrition wise for a certain subgroup, they were on, you were getting called into the office if you were the lead drill instructor on, hey dude, why is this happening? Knock this off, don't do this. And you were told basically to retain folks that were less than desirable. So I think in selecting for those and recruiting for those innate qualities and then training and giving the training folks the ability to roll those folks up or discharge them without cause, for say, even though there's a reason for it, you would get a better product out on the street now that would be more of, how shall we just say, a person that believes in a higher calling. But you can see those folks are leaving the departments in droves because they don't feel like they're being supported and or I think the people on the streets, the citizens do, but the brass is looking at them as what's the safest thing to do. It's easier just to let this guy go or fire this person and have them fight for their job back, or they don't encourage and or promote and support proactive police work. So I'll get off my soapbox on that, but I think that's a lot of what we're seeing because we've gotten in the interest of being woke or forward thinking or whatever it may be. We're getting away from that hiring practice that historically served us very well, in my opinion.
Well, I'm going to repeat what you said in a different way, because I saw this at the police academy when I was teaching there. I'd always ask the new recruits, why are you here? And in the modern generation, it was, well, I saw an ad in the paper. I was working at Home Depot. I needed a job. It's literally a job versus a generation before. It was, I want to be a cop. I want to be a hero.
Correct.
I wanted a career. It wasn't just a job. It was, they wanted to, it sounds cliche, but they truly wanted to protect and serve. Like that was it
No,
was
you're
the
right.
calling. And now it's really thought of as a job. And what I see now for the first time ever, people quitting police work to go be a bartender, or they just quit. Like that
Yeah.
never happened
You would
before.
have never happened.
You either died, got fired, or retired. Like now they just like, well, I did it for a couple years. I'm going to go back to bartending.
I put this in both my books because I wrote, I don't know why, I don't know how, if I didn't know about police work, I wouldn't have wanted to get into it. So I always wonder, how would these people get interested in police work? Because they really don't have a good idea what it really is, although I did. And so you had generations, and Ron, you're an example, and maybe Chuck, you are too. You had it was a legacy. In other words, hey, guys, this is a great job, a great career. It's fun going to work, and you're not only serving, it's fun going after the bad guys and making streets and communities safe. And not only that, you get all these other benefits. And then you keep seeing your mother and father come home and they enjoy what they're doing. Every day's different. They don't know what the next day is going to show. And then you're doing something of service. You're actually putting your life on the line for someone you'll never meet, maybe. And so now the legacies are saying, hey, listen, don't go into this profession. And you're going to lose that portion. So now you're getting, as you said, Chuck, people are coming in. They have no idea, only the perception. That's the reality of what the job is. And then in the new culture is, well, we don't stay in a job for 30 years. I'll do this for 2 and so, like you said, it's creating, it's not a good thing that's gonna rear its head down the road, I feel, or it already is.
Yeah, I'm concerned about it. And you just said this. I mean, would you encourage your kids to go to law enforcement now?
No. Well, I have 2 stepkids. I have 2 stepkids where normally years ago I might have been critical of them staying in the jails. Now I'm happy they are, and I'm glad they have no interest of going to patrol. Like you said, they're not. They really didn't join up for that reason, as I did. I mean, I was ready to quit because I was in custody too long, and they're just happy as can be. And I could have never sat with that. But like you said, it's a different mindset.
I just watched this documentary about the George Floyd thing, and it was kind of, I want to say, the other side of the story. And I don't know to what all degree is true or not. You don't know, but it made you think, wow, that this is a highly dangerous profession in a way that we never considered, right? The danger being the political and all that stuff.
I'll put this out to you guys, whether it's true or not. I'm going to say that it's hypothetical. And then maybe Ron or you guys are closer to it than I am. So I have a friend. He was a state of California police officer for 5 years. He is a bounty hunter, and he has his carry because he does bounty hunting, and they go into these places. So he was in an LAPD lobby, and he said, "Hey, is this like a no gun zone, or is it okay to carry?" And they asked him, "Well, do you have a concealed carry?" "Yeah, I do." No problem. So when he got talking with them, he says, this is what he tells me, allegedly, they kind of put out there that from the top down, pretty much it's a stand down order as far as any proactive policing, even from the point of being behind someone swerving, turn down the nearest road and don't even follow them. I mean, that's kind of the edict. I don't know if there's no doubt that some of that is already occurring if you're smart, because who wants to get caught up in something that may look bad and you're fired or going to jail. So have you guys heard any feedback on that type of thing?
Well, I'm in touch with quite a few active folks from a variety of agencies, and like speaking specifically just to California amongst other states. But I would say that is a relatively accurate testament or opinion. Excuse me, but it's unfortunate from that standpoint, but they're staying because they're either the sole income winner or it's a stable work for them. But
it's hard to explain to people because you can't prove what you didn't see, right? And so it's hard to explain to people, oh, my house was burglarized, and the police came and they were so wonderful and they did a great job, and they think that it's so great. and it's just hard to explain. Back in proactive police days, that burglar would have never got to your house because they were jamming them up in the neighborhood. So, I mean, we get in this mentality that, the cops are doing a great job because they come and take good reports. That's kind of, well, guess what? Back in the proactive days, you would have never got burglarized. And that's just kind of the sadness of the whole thing.
Well, I'll give a local example. In fact, you guys have intelligent commenters on here making good comments, but the vehicle thefts are just through the roof in our local jurisdiction. And part of it is there's like a no pursuit policy unless there's some sort of violent crime or kidnapping or something. And so the people stealing cars know the police are not allowed to pursue them. So there's no consequence. And so recently I heard this story secondhand where the cops started pursuing a stolen car because it fit within whatever criteria it was. I don't know the exact policy, but they were pursuing him. The thief of the car calls 911 on his cell phone to complain that the police are following him in the stolen car. It's just unbelievable.
It doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
So what's crazy is that on our department, Chuck, per policy, whoever took that complaint of what we call a WCSCR or Watch Commander Service Comment Report would be mandated to at least fill that out and write a memo as it relates to the inquiry or investigation into that on whether it was substantiated or not. But
this
for our
during the pursuit, he's on the phone during the pursuit.
It's bizarro world, man. I totally get it, man. It's just complete upside down and backwards. So on our department, unless it's changed, which I don't think it has, because I oversaw our emergency vehicle operations center as well as a lieutenant, was we can pursue a reported known stolen vehicle. Just straight up. You're not going to get long. Like if you go into different patrol divisions, depending on kind of the higher ups at the chief level down, I don't know, like in region 2 and or, central patrol, you'd probably get about 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then that way, at least the watch commander will be backed by the chief and stuff when it ultimately goes for review. If you let it go longer, you better have some more articulable facts. But I will offer this: out of all the risks and shenanigans and everything else I was involved in on the department, I didn't do a single day off for suspension until I was a lieutenant and I was held responsible for what folks in the field did while I was sitting at the station. Wow. And I always kind of overly backed my folks, which was frowned upon by management. But I would do it that way all over again. But I will tell you that, like I said, I backed my folks. I said, hey, let's make sure we do it better the next time, and wrote it up as training. And they said, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. There was no force, no shooting, no traffic collision, nothing. And, they gave me 3 days off. And I built a bridge. I'm way over that, if you can't tell, Cliff.
Yep, I can tell.
Yeah, you can totally tell as well. Chuck's looking at me, reading me with his psychological lenses.
Our chief, I know when he was a watch commander, he did his best to, as he said, kind of slow roll to the command, to the dispatch center, and give as much time as possible so that the field crew could give maybe further articulable facts to let the pursuit go. So I know he was always good at doing that. He let a pursuit go for 2 hours. I remember he told us about that one. And he was able to, of course, Pat Jordan, our chief and host of the show, is very articulable. When he makes a decision, he can back it up. So like you yourself, Ron. Hey, we're coming near the end of the show, guys. And so I'm going to, before I end this, and I want you guys to have a minute to give your adios and goodbyes. And I want to thank you for joining us. And I'll start with Ron, and anything you want to promote also, Ron. And I think I'm sure the chief is going to have you back on because you've been just a valuable asset to being on the show. So thank you. And any parting words that you have for us?
No, this has been a great experience. I'm glad I was able to do it with somebody like Chuck. I lack the talent and skills of you guys in the light that I express myself poorly in writing because I use like a number 9 crayon when I write. But with that being said, I appreciate you guys. I'll give the rest of my time to Chuck, but I want to thank the chief for approving it ahead of time, because I'm sure once he heard my name, he was like, bro, he's probably going to say like some sort of Mexican racial slur like beaner. He's going to work in there and all kinds of other stuff. So I appreciate him, once he heard my name, still being willing to allow me to be on the show, and hopefully he'll invite me back. But I had a great time, Cliff, and I'm not promoting anything other than world peace.
Thank you, Ron. You're awesome. Chuck.
I want to thank you guys for kind of pushing me to watch Super Troopers. I haven't seen the whole movie in a long time, and I enjoyed watching it last night with my wife. I enjoyed this conversation with you guys, and I was particularly impressed with the comments from the people. I mean, really, you have an intelligent audience, and so it was enjoyable from many perspectives.
Great. And Chuck, we'll talk later. I want to have you on my show. I do a show on personal growth development, and obviously, so now that we're fellow authors, we can talk about that. And I would encourage everybody, because you're a psychologist also, or
no, not. I have a doctorate degree in psychology.
Doctorate.
But
okay.
I'm a use of force expert. I don't get into that side of it.
But I would encourage people to get your book Shots Fired, get it on Amazon. Is it available in Audible too? And
yep, Audible. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and ebook, all the formats.
Yeah. Yes.
Great. I would encourage everybody to get it, because it'll give you a perspective of someone who has a doctorate in psychology and also has been there on the streets and experienced this, and give you an idea of what it's like to be in a shooting and everything that goes on revolving around that. So I would encourage you to get that book. And so we'll talk later, Chuck. I'd like to have you on the show, and I want to thank the Chief, Pat Jordan. He'll be back with you next week for having me on and allowing me to co-host and interact with my fellow law enforcement brothers here. And as always, I'm just marveled at how technology today allows us to get together and reunite and put out messages that can be seen and or heard around the world. How amazing is that? And so thanks, everybody, for checking in. I'll turn it over to the producers and hang around for a little debriefing after we go off air, my two co-hosts.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.